Pathikada, Bandula Jayasekara Samaga.
My guest today is the ambassador to Afghanistan in Sri Lanka, His Excellency Ashraf Haidari. Good morning, Ashraf.
Good morning.
So I thought we'll get to the point straight away.
Sure, thank you.
Can you tell us about the diplomatic relations between Afghanistan and Sri Lanka?
Well, our diplomatic relations with Sri Lanka were established in the 1960s for the first time on a resident basis. And then, unfortunately, it discontinued during the war years in Afghanistan. But we reestablished our relationship again on a non-resident basis with Sri Lanka out of Delhi.
Delhi, yeah.
And it was only in late 2013 when we elevated our relationship on a resident basis with Sri Lanka, opening an embassy in Sri Lanka in late 2013. And that's I think when our first ambassador, Ambassador Ahmad Zadeh, presented his credentials to the former President Rajapaksa.
And now you're the second ambassador?
Yes, for a while we didn't have an ambassador. We had a charge d'affaires for about maybe 2 years, and then I've recently been appointed as ambassador of Afghanistan to the friendly country and nation.
Is it Sri Lanka and Maldives or just Sri Lanka?
No, just Sri Lanka. We still represent Afghanistan to Maldives from Delhi, and where I used to be a deputy chief of mission, and I used to cover, of course, our relations with Sri Lanka, and very closely work with your just recently former Foreign Secretary, Prasad Karyavasam, who was then your High Commissioner in Delhi.
And now, how could you describe the relationship between two countries? How good are they, and how, I mean, people would really want to know how fine and how good they are.
Well, our relations with Sri Lanka have always been good, and of course they've been growing. The key purpose of my appointment on the part of our leadership, President Muhammad Ashraf Ghani, the Chief Executive Abdullah, is to further strengthen and build on what has been achieved over the past few years since 2013. And so I look very much forward to implementing the agreements and MOUs of bilateral cooperation on a number of different sectors, of course in close collaboration and partnership with our partners in your government, and as well as your private sector and even civil society. My intention is really to help strengthen multifaceted people-to-people contacts foremost through business and investment. And then, of course, government-to-government relations as well, in support of the rest of our relationship.
Could you take our viewers about these agreements? What sort of agreements have been signed, and have you got any plans for future agreements?
Exactly. We have signed an agreement on economy, education, science and technology, an agreement on air services between Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, which should enable us to even start a direct flight. That's one of my key goals, and as well as that of your ambassador in Kabul, which we discussed when I was still in Kabul together. And even we met with the senior economic advisor to President Ghani to see how we can facilitate this as soon as possible, because there's really vast demand, potentially speaking, among Afghans, both for tourism and as well as medical tourism. Because right now there are 4 or 5 planes of Afghans, mostly medical tourists, who go to Delhi seeking medical treatment, which I think a part of that can be captured by your
by the Sri Lankan
hospitals. Exactly. And so under that agreement we could start a direct flight, provided that we work on the demand, which is potentially there. Then also there is an agreement on employment of Sri Lanka's skilled labor.
Skilled labor.
You know, exactly, Afghanistan unfortunately is still going through war and violence, much of which has been imposed by certain state actors in our immediate neighborhood. And so as much as we have built capacity over the past 17 years, but still there are technical areas where we need technical capacity.
So such as if you could elaborate on the technical areas, because the viewers will be very keen to know what are these skilled areas.
Exactly. I mean, different fields of engineering, especially, let's say, geological engineering, because Afghanistan is so naturally endowed with a variety of mineral resources that we need to extract and then, of course, process and export for generating revenues that would help us boost our economic growth. And of course, medical sciences.
Like doctors?
Absolutely, especially specialized doctors in different fields, including complicated surgeries, and as well as nursing or dentistry. Not that we don't have, but not adequate. And so in other areas like financial management, information technology, all these areas that we haven't been able to build adequate capacity over the past 17 years. These are the areas that we can use more of your skilled labor. And so that's why we signed that agreement. And I think through that, a lot of Sri Lankans have been able to get jobs in Afghanistan, be it with the United Nations institutions or international organizations, and as well as with so many contractors and subcontractors of NATO and US and others.
But you mentioned that there are many Sri Lankans in Afghanistan right now?
I think the number is now diminished, especially since the end of the transition process, when most international forces withdrew from Afghanistan. And so with them, a lot of projects closed down and a lot of programs funded by different international aid organizations ended. But the potential is still there, provided that peace returns to Afghanistan, on which we've been working hard, as Sri Lanka did for almost 3 decades. So you went through a number of phases of the peace process, and eventually you were able to defeat terrorism. But I should also point out that we have signed a number of MOUs, one on supports, which I'm very much keen on implementing, to learn more from your cricket team. Of course, golf. We don't have, unfortunately, a golf course in Afghanistan, although we have a golf association headed by our Minister of Economy, who specifically asked me to work with the associations here to...
Golfing is very expensive in Sri Lanka. You're talking of 9 golf courses. Extremely expensive.
Yes.
Coming back now, you
and there's also one more, I think, MOU that's important to point out, and that's on building the capacity of Afghan nurses. which is one of our key priorities, especially midwives. As you know, in rural Afghanistan, much like here in rural Sri Lanka, there aren't many doctors and probably not good
The midwives
hospitals.
are doing a great job here.
And yes, and we need to train them so they are readily available when there are complications during delivery, so that they can save lives pretty much. Right now, we have a very high maternal mortality rate.
So do you have
because
an
of,
agreement with our health ministry to bring
Yes.
your midwives and train them here?
Absolutely. Not many Afghan, unfortunately. Like I said, the MOUs and agreements that we have signed. And of course, there's an MOU to be signed between Columbia University and Kabul University. That's almost finalized by both sides. Just our president of Kabul University needs to come and sign that. And then potentially an MOU or agreement on trade and investment protection and promotion. That also needs to be signed. And there's one more that we are interested in, that's on the extradition of inmates and prisoners in case
I think that's important. Now
so these are almost all the agreements and MOUs that we have signed. But of course, on the longer term, my intention is also to promote security and defense cooperation between our relevant institutions, because of course, given your experience in counterinsurgency, in counterterrorism, and as well as counter narcotics and human trafficking.
So which means you want to work with our defense forces?
Absolutely, to learn from their expertise and experience. And this is my kind of medium-term goal.
How would you do that? How do you plan to do that?
Well, foremost discussing that with your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then possibly, if necessary, with the either the President, the Prime Minister, and then of course with your defense institutions, with the Defense Minister and their military technical officers, to see what can be done on issues of common interest and shared interest. And I think there are many.
Yeah. Now you were blaming a neighboring country. I was in North Waziristan, or I don't know if I got the name correct, but the thing is, where I saw that fence being built, and I could see the Afghan-Pakistan border. What have you got to say about that? You are blaming really Pakistan, you're pointing a finger at Pakistan?
Well, we're not really blaming. I think it's something that the former Pakistani president, President Musharraf, has acknowledged, and former intelligence chiefs have acknowledged the fact that the Taliban leadership and rank and file enjoy safe sanctuaries and military financial support there. And I think it's now public knowledge that that's where the Taliban operate out of. And that's where the wounded fighters are actually taken and hospitalized and receive treatment at the specific locations in hospitals. So yeah, for a while, probably in the initial years, this was disputed, but right now it's public knowledge and everyone knows where the Taliban get supported and from where they launch most of their terrorist attacks or plot to launch terrorist attacks across Afghanistan.
You think with Imran Khan being the Prime Minister of Pakistan, you think, and he's an ardent human rights campaigner, a social activist, you think there'll be a difference between or improvement considering the relationship between the two countries, you think?
We really hope so. I mean, we have always offered to work with any government that has come to power in Pakistan, including His Excellency Prime Minister that you pointed out. And we have specific frameworks which we have worked with Pakistan to implement, the last of which is the Afghanistan-Pakistan action plan for peace and solidarity, which we call APAPS. Yeah. That is, 4 or 5 working groups, the key of which is the one on counterterrorism and the peace process, which if, of course, they do their part to implement, then we should be able to, on the one hand, to fight elements that do not lay down their weapons and reject the generous peace offer which our president made in last February. And on the other hand, for Pakistan to bring the Taliban leadership to the negotiation table to basically discuss any conditions that they may have so that we begin a meaningful and results-oriented peace process and reach a political settlement so that this war and violence ends after now 17 years. And of course for Afghans, if we count from back the years when you visited Pakistan, maybe from late 1970s, 80s, now almost 40 years, almost my generation has spent all these years in war and violence. Afghans are tired. They have suffered unspeakably, and I think it's time for Pakistan, it's time for the rest of the region and the rest of the world really to come together in support of the Afghan people to end this, because to end the war in Afghanistan is really in the best interest of the Pakistani people and the government's current and future, of course, because together our youthful populations seek jobs. They want jobs. They want a secure future together in this region and with the rest of the world. And unless, of course, Afghanistan, right at the heart of Asia, is stabilized, it's really hard for Pakistan to be stable and peaceful, and for Iran and for Central Asian, states in the north and the rest of the region. And we know that from the 1980s, from the spillover effects of war and violence in Afghanistan. No. So it is in the best shared interest of all of our six neighbors to come together to help stabilize Afghanistan.
No, Afghanistan must be the only country which boasts of a CEO. I mean, we know of CEOs in private companies, but how did this happen? He could have been the Prime Minister, but you call this person CEO, why?
Yes, because the constitution of Afghanistan doesn't have that specific provision. And therefore, there had to be an arrangement between the president and, of course, the other front runner in the last elections to create this position so that both sides would share power in a kind of coalition, national unity government that was created to ensure consensus from, all electorate who came out and really by thousands to vote for the president and as well as for the chief executive. An arrangement that, of course, has worked quite well, despite, of course, differences of opinion, which are normal in any democracy, especially when the government is a coalition, national unity government. But the president, the chief executive have worked very well, of course, keeping
to the betterment of Afghanistan.
Yeah, national interests of Afghanistan and their heart, and we've been able to achieve a number of significant goals since 4 years ago in terms of reforms, fighting corruption, enhancing regional connectivity through Afghanistan and between Afghanistan and our neighbors, of course, launching this air corridors initiative through which we've been able to export our horticultural products to South Asia, now to the Gulf countries, now recently also to Europe and as well as China. And of course, like I said, the air services agreement that we have signed with Sri Lanka, one of the key tasks which President Ghani gave me when we met prior to my departure was to create this relationship with Sri Lanka through the air corridor so that we will have two-way trade of our goods.
How come you are doing so well in cricket? Sri Lanka was beaten, so many other teams were beaten. They are an amazing team.
Thank you so much. I know we've been really proud of our team because they've been rising and continue rising regionally and now, of course, globally, participating in big matches and well-established teams, including Sri Lanka, which we, of course,
put us to shame. Yeah.
beat you, and I think it has been received well in Sri Lanka. Each time I come across over the past 3 weeks, ordinary Sri Lankans, the first thing that they mention when I say I'm from Afghanistan is their praise for our team. Of course, most of our players learn how to play cricket on the streets of Pakistan, where of course their parents and families were living as refugees, because cricket has not been traditionally played in Afghanistan. It's basically a game that they picked in refugee life, and they've been playing it with passion. If you know, I'm sure about our bowler, spinner Rashid Khan. He is now #1 in what he does in the world.
Definitely.
And we're proud of them.
So you got a proper plan to develop cricket, and it has, it has given joy to Afghanistan.
Absolutely. I mean, the president has taken a serious interest, and as well as the chief executive from the top leadership were committed to further developing and looking after the needs of our team. And of course, here in Sri Lanka, I will do everything I can to bring our cricket teams together for friendly matches and for capacity building in areas where, of course, we need capacity, especially when it comes to our new players, because I've heard that you have schools or courses specifically geared towards teaching cricket technically and professionally, which we don't have in Afghanistan. I think I would be happy definitely to explore that further, to learn more, and to see how much we can do on cricket with Sri Lanka, because I know it's also a passion of the Sri Lankan people. I saw that recently. I went to one of the matches between your team and England. I think you beat them first time, but in the second you came very close to beating them. Friendly team, but that's something that I look forward to working on.
I noticed in such a short time, as a youthful ambassador, you have brought lots of energy to Sri Lanka. I see you on Twitter, I see you tweeting lots of things, and you have suddenly, you're putting Afghanistan on the map, which I didn't notice before. I'm not trying to flatter you, this is what I've noticed.
Thank you.
What are your plans?
Well, my plan is really to...
You're reaching out in an amazing way.
Yes, to introduce the Sri Lankans to the Afghan people, and vice versa. Of course, you being an island, one of the most beautiful islands. I often hear people call Sri Lanka the paradise on earth, and so is Afghanistan, a landlocked country, of course increasingly land-linked, but with some of the really most picturesque natural beauties, from our mountains to lakes to rivers to deserts to ancient city-states. Now, of course, our major cities like Kabul, like Herat, like Kandahar, and Jalalabad. There is so much with 4 different climates to see in Afghanistan. And I've already been sharing the sights and sounds of Sri Lanka on our social media pages, so that Afghans explore and see, and then of course make a plan to visit, those who can of course afford, and their menu can afford, and they've already been visiting Sri Lanka. And as well as
same thing from Sri Lankans to
from Afghanistan, yes, to Sri Lankans, encouraging Sri Lankans to visit Afghanistan, because we ultimately share a common cultural and civilizational heritage, that before the 7th century, of course, it was Buddhism that was practiced in Afghanistan. And that's why we have the largest statues of Buddha in central Afghanistan, the province of Bamiyan, which unfortunately, again, much to our dismay and disappointment, the Taliban, again supported out of Pakistan, dynamited and destroyed those symbols of a great religion, a peaceful religion, Buddhism, practiced by most of Sri Lankans. Now, if you go on the social media pages of our embassy, of course, the banners are all the statues of Buddha, of course, in which we take so much pride, because that is very much a part of our national identity. That is who we are as Afghans. We're very much like the Swiss. We're very multi-ethnic, diverse. We're a very pluralistic society, but of course underpinned by all these rich heritage values, which make us who we are as Afghans.
Ashraf, now you were talking about Buddhism.
Yes.
Is there now, we have so many our Buddhist pilgrims going to India, to Nepal. Have you got any plans for our Buddhist pilgrims?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've been promoting, tourism across Afghanistan, but especially in areas where there is security. And of course, Bamyan is one of the most secure provinces, especially the city where the statues of Buddha are located. And to the extent that we, get an interest, especially when it comes to a group of pilgrims, our Ministry of Culture and Information, of course, would be happy to facilitate their visit. And if this happens on a regular basis, then of course the private sector would become interested in investing, say, and establishing travel agencies which would cater to the pilgrims from Sri Lanka. So that's
and
why
also you need because that's why you're trying to push this air service agreement for them to go. How do you?
And we have, I think I forgot to mention this, that we have an agreement on cultural cooperation. So this issue would fall under that, which I'm looking forward to discussing with the Minister of Culture here to see how we can facilitate tourism by your pilgrims to Bamyan.
How do one go to Afghanistan? How do you come via?
Well, it's very simple. Yeah. You either go through Delhi or through Dubai. Of course, through Doha, it's also possible, but the shortest way is right now, Delhi, flying from here by Sri Lankan or SpiceJet or any number of South Asian airlines to Delhi, and then from Delhi we have our 2-3 of our own airlines, Ariana Airline, Comair, and of course there are other airlines which fly out of Delhi to Kabul. And of course Kabul is one of the largest cities in South Central Asia, and many 5-star hotels, 4-star hotels. There are also guest houses where pilgrims can stay, and they would be most welcome, warmly welcomed by the Afghan hotel industry. And then of course there are other travel agencies which could facilitate their internal travel, going again flying from Kabul to Bamyan, which takes about 25 to 30 minutes. And there as well we have several 5-star hotels, at one of which I stayed, and very comfortably. They could stay there probably for a week or so, explore, and also go and see Banda Amir, take lots of photos, enjoy their time, Afghan hospitality, food, and enjoy the beautiful mountainous scenes, and then come back.
Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, we wish you luck and we wish you all the best in your time in Sri Lanka.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Pathikada Bandula Jayasekara Samaka